Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everybody is doing well. Surprise. Hope you're all doing great. Today on Gnomon Art Jam, we're going to be continuing a project that we had been doing in the past several streams, which I'm kind of excited to continue working on, but also might jump into just doing a little bit of breaking up what we normally do, maybe jump into ZBrush, do just some warm-up sculpts to just kind of get into the flow of things. In case you've never seen or been to a Gnomon Art Jam before, we'll mostly be hanging out for a couple hours here. I'll be working on a piece of art. You're welcome to ask questions about process, ask questions about anything that you find interesting, whether that also be, stuff about learning, stuff about Gnomon programs, curriculum, all that kind of stuff. Happy to answer those types of questions. So I will be here for a while. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to get some music playing here in a second. So if there's any issues with the sound being too loud, too quiet, or if there's any issues with the stream in general, please let me know, and I'll kind of adjust that as needed. So I'm going to add to the stream here. This is the model that we've been working on for the past several weeks. I'll find the concept art so you guys can find it. This is not by, the concept art is not by me, but is by an artist named Bjorn Huri. And so this is the piece that we have been working on. I'll rotate this a little bit so we can see. Over the past several weeks, we have been modeling this based off of this concept, but also, jumping back and forth from ZBrush to Maya, and right now in this state, which is roughly where we left it off, I'll jump into ZBrush here in a second, it's a polygized model with some smooth on it so that we could export it into ZBrush. So that's kind of why you see it right now as a single mesh. So I'm going to jump into ZBrush, which is where we actually left off last stream. And what I was doing was I was basically taking all this using a morph target and doing some subtle adjustments here that'll probably bring back into Maya so that we can do those final tweaks. Additionally, what you're seeing is I'm also adding some of these last little bits of detail because I want to make sure that we capture all these elements, and then I'll probably come in and get some more elements. Like, let's just say I come in here. We could do it a couple different ways, but we'll like append just very quickly a cube. Could even take some of these. All right, spots. So we can get a little bit more preview because as you can see here, there's these kind of red straps. So I do want to at some point address those, where they are, what they look like, and so on. So still work to do on this character for sure, but it is coming along, which I'm happy with. Over the course, I think this will be our 5th stream. I am only working on this character during the streams. So if you are interested in seeing the process of this character get built from scratch, you can go back to our YouTube channel or Twitch channel and find those streams, and you can get that info there so you can kind of see it from the very beginning. Because like I said, I don't think I've spent, what I recall, I don't think I spent any time outside of the stream working on this character. So if you're interested in seeing this kind of be a making of, you can do that. And so now we're back in ZBrush, and this is just an easier place to start adding some of these little details. This is something we could do in Maya, which we've been doing over the past several weeks, but ZBrush is just a little more fun to use sometimes. So you can see kind of getting these straps in, and this is what I would want to do over the whole character. Get these little straps in here, get these little things here, and basically just make sure that everything is looking the way that it should look. So I'll come in here, I'll use my subtool master, and I'm going to mirror this across. That'll put these over here. And I can actually just control drag. Well, it's masked. I could probably just mirror it. Oh, didn't work on the mask. Aquaman as well. There's not a design for the back of the character, so I'm just kind of making it up as I go. This is going to cause some problems, as you can see here, with the sides of the shoulder. A little confusing. So just something I'll have to be aware of. Or at least to a point where it's feeling okay. Realize I didn't have symmetry on there, so we're just going to actually delete. Now I have symmetry on, now I don't. We're going to keep this part. There shouldn't be anything there, so we're just going to delete hidden. Then we're going to go in here and do a mirror and weld. There we go. So those will match up perfectly now. And then we're going to grab the front ones, mirror them down, so we can get the ones for here as well. You could do this in Maya. Again, this is whatever program that you feel is going to be best for you. Me, I'm using ZBrush at this stage just because I find it enjoyable to do. Any questions in the process or anything as I'm working, like I said, always feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to answer them. I do think I'm going to get a little change of pace here, and we're just going to sculpt something for a little while. We've been working on this character for 5 streams in a row now, so just kind of change it up. A little progress before we do that. So those are in there. It's also making me realize that maybe this proportions are not right. And that's actually kind of the point why we're here in ZBrush is if I go back to this piece, which is one solid piece of geometry, I'm going to load up some of the previous models so you can kind of see what they were looking like before we did this. And even just a couple more so you can kind of see where we started. So this is the first sculpt that I did on the stream a couple weeks ago. And then we spent a little bit more time on that. And we just basically fleshed out those proportions to push it a little bit further. And then we jumped over into Maya for a couple of streams, and we ended up getting it to a place where most of this stuff is polymodeled. So there is a smooth on this. So if I go down to 0 here, you'll see kind of what this is looking like. This is nicely laid out topology that we can work with that will give us a nice model at the end of this. That was built on top of this model. And then now we've taken that model from Maya, we're pushing it back into ZBrush, and we are taking it here and doing some final adjustments. So you can see that the level of fidelity and how clean the model is continues to get better with every phase. But what we're trying to do here, and this sometimes happens in all kinds of things, but as you progress to more finished and like rendered result, often you can see that, you know, some of the, like if you look at a sketch, there's sort of like a energy to a sketch or something that is there, and sometimes when you get to the final results, it's not there. So there's a little bit of that was lost And so you can see me now using this morph target. It's very subtle, but this is before and this is after. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm capturing the elements that I really need. And then we have all of these little details that I'm bringing in and sculpting on this mesh so that when I bring this back into Maya for some minor proportional adjustments, that I can bring these elements back as well, and we'll polymodel them there so that we can have those as good reference, just like we did with this piece as well. So that is where we are at. But like I was saying, I'm going to do a quick save on this. Next version. We're going to jump into doing a little bit of sculpting and do a little bit of warm-up. What I really like to do is just kind of try to find ways to do warm-ups, to do something that can kind of get your mind into a just general creative process, especially if you're doing something that is, you know, maybe slight adjustments, it's little detail work. So we're just going to do a sculpt from a sphere or something today for a little bit. I really like, in case you haven't seen, I really like using these head planes. These are in the project folder, and there's some great things here to start from if you really want to just kind of zen out or start from a character. These are really great. Spheres are good as well. So I think just for ease of use today, we'll use one of these. We'll use the 128 one. That's the level of Dynamesh, so we'll start with that. It's going to erase all this stuff that's on our screen, which is why I saved. So it's going to create a new project here. I'm going to jump into a mat cap that I like. We'll use maybe something just different. Again, this is to kind of clear our mind and work on something else for a little bit differently. I'm going to turn up some wax preview, go into the render here to make sure that that is on. So turn on wax preview so you get a little adjustment there. And then we'll start sculpting. There we go. Turn the floor off, and we're just going to start getting into something to get a little more creative. If anybody has suggestions on what I should make, I am happy to listen to them. It's always nice to kind of get a little thing to start from. Otherwise, it's easy with these to start building, because the planes of the head are very solid in this. It's pretty easy to, like, you know, build in some of these starting forms or carve away at some of these starting forms, for example, and just kind of start building up something. So I'm not trying to smooth or go very crazy with what's already here. I'm just adding to it because that foundation is already very strong. Now this is going to result in a relatively generic looking character, you know, because the proportions haven't changed, but we can mess with that. Sculpt a perfect sphere from the head. You could actually probably smooth it out pretty well and do that. There's two smooths, and one of the smooths is actually really good at maintaining round shapes, which I would recommend checking out. This always kind of starts as something that's more skeletal, right? Skeletal, I see in the chat, you know, zombie face. You know, getting something like that is always kind of easy because you're building off the planes of the forms or the face, and so it's like getting that bone structure. When you think of zombies or, you know, things that have that kind of skeletal look, really it is just the skeleton. So finding that is not terribly hard, right? Getting that eye socket in there if we wanted to do that. What I like about this is you can also just stretch this pretty dramatically. So if we want to squash it, we want to stretch it, we want to do something differently, right? We want to maybe make the neck wider or something. Oh, not intending for that part to go like that. This is a little wider. give it like a little angle of this pose or something. They're just such good starting grounds that you can really make whatever you want. Question from Twitch. So when I stretch the mesh like that, does ZBrush automatically fill in the mesh to make the density even, or do I have to do that manually? You have to do that manually unless you turn on some of the Sculptors Pro mode, which is up here. So when I'm stretching it like this, you'll see that gets pretty stretched. If I just make a Dynamesh, this is already a Dynamesh object, so if I just click and drag, it will remesh the surface and do that pretty quickly and easily. Dynamesh was one of those huge innovations that ZBrush has introduced that really made it so much easier to sculpt. I would prefer to complete hard surface, start in Maya, then import to ZBrush. Often it's actually the reverse of that. I would prefer to end in Maya. Because especially if you're going to be rendering, if there's an object that's going to be in a pipeline, I find that being in the package at the end that you're going to be rendering in is probably the one you want to use. Do I use a Wacom or 3D tablet? Yes, I use a Wacom Pro. I'm using here today. And then do I have shortcuts for the most used brushes? I do. Yes, that's a question from YouTube. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all as hotkeys for my most used brushes, which are going to be the move brush, the standard brush, the clay buildup brush, the standard brush, and inflate brush, 1 through 6. And then 7 I map as the stroke replay last function, which in case you've never used that is under stroke. Replay last is right here. And basically what that does is, like, if I make a big movement with something, so I'll move this with the move brush, I can do stroke replay last and it will continue to do that action. This is great for doing different things, but it's also great for moving multiple subtools and stuff like that. Well, a good question from YouTube right now: why do we not teach Blender at Gnomon? It's definitely a conversation we've been having quite a bit. Blender is, the Gnomon's kind of goal is to make sure that people are trained and ready for the industry, and it's kind of the what the industry demands is what we teach. And for a long time, Blender was more of just an introductory package that it was kind of like you would get introduced in Blender and then you would graduate to another one. and which right now and for a long time has been Maya. So Maya is kind of the industry standard package that big studios are using. But we're starting to see, especially in the concept crowd and a lot of people who are getting into 3D, Blender becoming more and more popular. So we're definitely having conversations about how we should teach it, what we should teach, if it fits into our pipeline. But it is on our radar for sure. A good question. Yeah, 3ds Max and Maya are probably the most two that are used. Something like Modo or Blender or some of these other programs are definitely used. I'm not saying they're not used, but as far as like ones that are heavy parts of a pipeline, those are the big two for sure. You get some questions. Have we ever considered having a dedicated render farm on campus? Yes, we have. There's just technological issues with that, and also how quickly that they age out. So it's another thing we've considered, but nothing that we're going to pursue immediately. Blender came out. Blender has a ton of tutorials online for sure. Blender Guru being a big one. I think I've heard 1 million people do the donut tutorial or whatever, which is pretty interesting. I think it's more like, we'll get to that in a second. I'm thinking this might be more like fur. Let's see. Can I help you? What are the scopes of a self-taught artist in the industry? Do they get jobs, or is there a lot of struggle? I know a lot of people who are self-taught only. I think that's okay. at the end of the day, when you're applying for a job or looking to get a job, it's about your portfolio. And that's really it. So if you can be self-taught and have a quality portfolio, then that's all you need. So is there additional struggles with that because you might not have all the resources or somebody teaching you specific softwares or whatever? Yeah, I mean, there's definitely challenges in doing self-taught. Not saying there isn't, but it's definitely possible. Yes, this is a Dynamesh object right now. I'm just kind of doing a little warm-up this morning. I'm not entirely sure what your question is about. You're saying student versions, but student versions of what? You're learning on your own, and the hardest part has been figuring out what to practice to learn each fundamental. Thankfully, there's a lot of free, amazing resources. Yes, that's true. There's a ton of amazing, cool stuff out there, from YouTube channels to events to all kinds of things to breakdowns. Always be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. We do, we do ArtJam every week. So if you're interested in asking questions or processes of this, always welcome to be here. We do events as well. And there's a ton of other resources that you can check out too, especially if you're looking to learn like a specific software or program. Epic is doing tons of stuff right now. So definitely, if you want to learn real time, it's a great time to do that. What makes a well-rounded portfolio for someone who might want to be a hard surface modeler? Let's see. That's a good question. Hard surface is going to kind of range between, props, ships, robots, stuff like that. So it would probably have a little bit of all of that. Like if you want to be more of a character-focused person, or if you want to be more of like a ship person or something, I might have a little insight into that. I would definitely have if you only want to do hard surface, I would probably just only have hard surface stuff on your site or your portfolio or whatever that is, to make it so it's a little more relevant to specifically what you want to do. Environment stuff is always great, machinery, cars, some of the basic stuff, so that when somebody views your portfolio, they don't kind of ask the question of like, oh, well, can they make, I see 10 cars on their portfolio, but can they do X? And I think that that's an interesting thing that people don't always think about is what the potential employer is looking at or thinking when they look at your portfolio. So kind of get in their head and try to imagine what it would be like for them to look at your portfolio and say, like, what am I missing? And that's, I guess, the easiest thing. So having a little bit of range in what you do is probably a smart idea. Wireframes, obviously, showing some wireframes of what your work is. Hard surface modelers specifically are probably going to have more work in a program. You can show stuff in ZBrush, which is great. If you can show that you made stuff in ZBrush, that might be valuable as well, using ZModeler. But you're also definitely going to want to show stuff in another program, right? Or that was made in another program. Does having Blender on your resume do you any good? Definitely shows that you know 3D, but I don't think it is really necessarily going to help you, getting a job like in a big studio. Maybe if your skill set is more, along like concept art or something like that, where it's a bit more, showing that you have other tools in your toolbox, I could see that being very valuable. But if you're wanting to be a modeler or a 3D artist of some kind, like more specifically a 3D artist, I don't think it's a huge win for you, no. Let's see. Not sure, Dino, about that. I don't know about the graduation stuff or how that really works on the extensions of that. I'm realizing now at this point that this looks like an artist I know on Instagram. I'm trying to find their work. Like, this is definitely very inspired by, but I can't remember. There it is. Realizing this looks a lot like this person's work. This is why I can't pronounce them, but there's a lot of really cool work. It kind of has this vibe to it. Like, oh, this is kind of somewhat channeling some of these sculpts that they're doing, which are cool. I really dig the forms that they make. Let's see. A question from YouTube about how I learned and how I started my journey as an artist. Yes, I will definitely talk about that in a minute. Here's a question from Twitch. I'm assuming Blender pieces in your portfolio is fine as long as they know you're proficient in ZBrush and or Mudbox. It's fine. I think that, again, it depends on what the studio uses. Like, if the studio uses Maya, showing them stuff in Blender is going to be nice, but expect the question in your interviews, or at least during that, if you know another 3D package outside of Blender. I'm trying to say Blender's bad, but it's kind of not the industry standard for most studios. So if you're wanting to get a job at a big studio, just kind of expect that you're going to have to answer questions about what you know and don't know. Niyazi Selim Oglu. I don't know how to say that name, so I apologize. But this is their name, their handle, and they have some really awesome sculpts, really cool rhythms in their forms and stuff like that. I just love, especially this is kind of looks like what I'm unintentionally channeling, but some of this is definitely coming through. Some really cool forms coming through here, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, this is just kind of a warm-up sculpt, just kind of getting into the flow. We have another project that we've been working on for the past several weeks. Jumping in, I'll load it up here and then we'll jump into Maya. But this kind of character here is one that we've been working on based off of a concept. So we'll continue to jump into that at some point. And I've been working on that in Maya as well. So this is it all merged so I could get it out. But you can see this is lower topology that has been polymodeled. So this is kind of where we are with that one. But actually kind of enjoying working on this sculpt. It's nice to just kind of get into something different. If you work on something for several weeks in a row, I'm going to try to channel some more of that other artists' things, see what they're doing. I like that they really, sometimes using other artists for studies is a good thing to do. Like look at the interesting forms that are being developed. And here, there's all these really cool forms that are overlapping. And the rhythms are really great, the way that they play into each other. So I kind of like that. Hey, do you work in Substance Painter? Just wondering if you show you bake light for textures. I can't show you that today, no, and I don't do a significant amount of work in Substance Painter. Definitely a really awesome program when I use it, but it's not something I spend a ton of my time in. Favorite thing to create for a warm-up? Just heads. I think just sculpting heads, because they're a fun challenge to just figure out like what makes something interesting, to look at other artists' work and say like, oh, this is cool. How are they doing this? What is successful about this? What's not successful? I think on this stream alone, I've probably sculpted 20 different heads. Not today, but through all the different streams that we've done. ZBrush interface is definitely a challenge to get used to, but I think I kind of stand by it to defend it. Like I think that once you know what you need in it, I find it really user friendly and easy to use. I think it's actually one of the more user friendly interfaces once you know where you're going. It definitely can be a challenge. Right, I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to take the whole thing. I'm going to inflate it by -5. That pushes the whole object inside. And now I'm going to sculpt through it. This is a technique I use quite a bit to kind of help define shapes or forms that I wouldn't want to sculpt into the base. And sometimes you can create interesting results or happy accidents because there is a whole nother mesh inside there that be kind of fun. So let me just turn Sculptors Pro on for. Maybe we'll take like this one. Which program do I find that has the most maddening interface? That's a good question. I think one that I found really difficult to use would probably be Modo. Because they use a lot of different terms. As far as like a standard 3D program, they use a lot of different terms and different ways to work. And I think that was one that for me was a little harder than I expected it to be. I know there's some hair brushes. I don't have any in here, but that is something I was considering finding. At least I don't think there's any like sculpting hair brushes in here. I haven't looked in a while. Groom is different than what I'm wanting. I'm wanting just like pulling out little bits of hair. You can use the snake hook. Is a pretty easy one. Yeah, Cyberpunk comes out today, and I think later tomorrow, depending on where you're at. I saw the 10th, so that's interesting. Let's see what we got. What is a must-have book for your bookshelf? That's a great question. What is a must-have book for your bookshelf? I think it depends on what you like. I think good reference books. Like I think one of my favorite ones that I look at quite a bit is Atlas Obscure, which you can see right here. That's one that I like to have out all the time. But I don't know if there's a specific one, unless you're like, if you were doing clay sculpture or if you were doing character stuff, or if you're doing environment stuff, I think I could pick different things, but it really does depend. I mean, this is sort of feeling like I could pretty easily turn this into like a Logan. Logan type. Here's obviously a giveaway, but it's not. I am using the Sculptors Pro mode, which actually does some really fun things, where the larger the brush size you use, the larger the polygons it makes, and that creates a pretty interesting result where you can actually sort of like optimize or decimate parts of your mesh that you weren't going to use before. Excuse me, that you weren't going to use before. If there's any artists that are using ZBrush and its illustrative renders for comic book or graphic novels, that would be interesting to see. There are some. I don't know if they're using them for like ones that are out, but I've definitely seen artists use that. I've tried it myself, and I think it's a fun process. The biggest challenge I found with it is interior shots are a little more difficult because of some of the perspective things. Of course, I'm sure that will change over time. ZBrush is very good at reacting to what people want and finding new ways to do things. So. Am I turning more into a thing we're working on? And warm-up sketch, which is what it started as. It's kind of fun to work on, so I'm enjoying it. All right, there was a question. Let's see, we had a couple questions. Do concept artists need to have a knowledge of fundamental or to have knowledge fundamentals, or 3D took over it? I think you're asking, should you have knowledge of fundamentals, meaning painting, drawing, and traditional stuff like that? I think the answer to that is yes, you should. Absolutely. 3D is a great thing to have, and there are some artists, especially concept artists, who are maybe only or solely use 3D as their primary element, but I think you'll see even those who use 3D very heavily now probably have some fundamentals, and being able to draw in a meeting, right, sketch something on a napkin is a skill that is important to a concept artist, because you're often talking to directors, or you're talking to people who are in charge, and you need to be able to have those conversations and be able to communicate with them in the moment. So yeah, 2D skills are great. It's at the end of the day, you're going to be producing images or artworks that a director or somebody else is going to be reviewing, right? And that you need to be able to communicate their vision is really what it comes down to. So it's all about what works for you in the process. And sometimes certain directors are going to be more interested in seeing 3D stuff. Sometimes they're going to be interested in doing 2D stuff. So that all depends. Did I ever take John Brown's traditional sculpting class? I did. Yes, actually at Gnomon I did take that class, and I do highly recommend it. It's a great class, and John is a really good teacher as well. So highly recommended to take the traditional sculpting classes. Absolutely. How do I feel about, let's see, how do I feel about VR sculpting used for concept art? Have I used it? I have used it. I've used things like Gravity Sketch. I've not used Medium. And I feel good about it. I think it's got a cool place. I think the challenge that we have in VR is how do you show it, right? You know, certain people are going to sculpt better or in a different way. And so as long as at the end of the day you're showing it in a way that makes sense, then you should be fine. And I don't think there's much of a problem there. Yeah, John also teaches very great anatomy, like I'm seeing in the chat. You know, something he does really well is teaches anatomy, but more kind of specifically in a way that is for artists. What I mean by that is, you know, he teaches. I think it's Bridgman is his favorite artist, and so he, which is a 2D artist, a traditional artist from a while ago, and he uses more the concept of silhouette, teach anatomy, and the peaks and valleys and apexes of curves and stuff like that, rather than just, you know, here's the name of a muscle and here's where the muscle goes and stuff. And that's important to know, especially as you progress in your career, you know, knowing some of what those things are so that you can talk about them or critique them or understand what needs to be fixed. But it's not the sole thing. Knowing anatomy is important, but knowing all the names of the muscles isn't as important. It's more important to just have a solid understanding of what they look like and where they go and what they do. I don't like that face so far. Just kind of noodling on it. I want to instead of using the thing here, I'm going to subdivide this. Oh, see, there we go. I had Sculptors Pro still on, so I'm actually going to subdivide this mesh. And then sculpt on it. That means I can't use, well, I can use Dynamesh anymore, but it will go back to what the previous resolution was. How long did it take me to feel comfortable sculpting? That's a good question. It would probably, I got pretty comfortable sculpting by the end of my time at Gnomon, which is going to be, you know, about 2 years, a year and a half of time. So not too long, but enough time to put in the time to feel comfortable. You know, I think I felt comfortable, but it was also kind of a thing of being able to sculpt anything at any time, not having reference, you know, knowing what I'm wanting to make. Like at that time, I could do a sculpt for fun like this, but it would take me a little longer to get to some of the foundational stuff I'm able to hit faster. Let's see. You are new to ZBrush and a self-learner. Should you start with the full version or core? I think core is probably a better place to start, especially if you're just getting into it. If you're very confident and you're like, I'm loving this, I know that I like 3D. I just really want to get into this. Probably jumping into the full version is a better idea. There's better, longer upgrades, so you don't have to deal with buying the program multiple times. You won't run into issues where all of a sudden you feel limited. It's kind of the question of like, do you want the full piece of software or do you want like the starter piece of software? And if you feel confident that you're going to get into the full stuff eventually, I would say just get the full stuff. When I sculpt, I use everything in the app, or do I just use kind of my go-to features? I usually just use my go-to features. So I think that there's some stuff that you can use, but most of the time, I'm not going to use the simulation on this character right away. Right, I'm not going to use a lot of the main features of the extra features of a program like this that are relatively simple. Is it better to sculpt for games from ZBrush, or do you go to other software? At the end of the pipeline for games, you're almost always going to be in a program that's going to be able to export. And so that is usually going to be something like a Maya or a Max. So I would say sculpting from ZBrush is good and probably pretty essential, to be honest, but I don't know if it's going to be your only tool to be able to get away with. I wager it's almost never going to be the only tool in games. What kind of gaming industry is going to be in the future? Are there more realistic games or stylized games? Oof, that's a hard question to answer. I think probably going to be both. I don't necessarily see realistic games going away, but I also really don't see, stylized games going away either. So probably one where I'd say it's a toss up that they're both going to be, or it's probably a sure thing that they're both going to be around for quite a while. Do I feel like AI will take over a lot of jobs in industry? No, I do not. What do I think is the most interesting new development in 3D and CG? That's a good question. What's the most interesting new development? And VR is obviously not new, but it's a cool thing. I think VR, virtual production in general, is a cool development. Seeing that people are working, being able to visualize spaces and sets, and I think it's a really interesting time for creators in general because you can see what the final product could look like, even though it's fully digital. I think that's interesting. I think virtual production as a whole, as that's moving forward, I think like things like you see on the Mandalorian with LED walls is a really, really cool development that I'm expecting to be around for quite a while. I think that'll be something that sticks for a long time and sort of becomes either a replacement or a potential substitute for green screen. What else do I think is interesting? LED walls are relatively new. I don't know if it's the first use ever in Mandalorian, but it's definitely one of the most prominent ones. I think it's also the fact that they're using game engine tech, that they're using Unreal to bridge that is an interesting use of it because it's different than the standard VFX way of making something. And then now that they're building sets into it and they're finding cool ways to bridge that gap, I think is one of those things that is kind of taking it to a bit of a different level than what it was before, which is probably to me the coolest element of it. It's slow for some reason. I make 3D stuff every day, consistent drawing practice. I don't as much as I'd like to. I do try to stay creative and get into it as much as possible. But unfortunately, I don't have the time to do it every day anymore. But especially when I was working on projects, like when I was working on day-to-day projects, I would work on stuff. I would sculpt every single day. I would be doing art of some kind every single day. Absolutely. It's good to get into that habit, though. This nose is not really going the way that I want it to go, but I think overall we're making some cool progress with this thing. Signed up for your first Gnomon classes next year. That's awesome. That's congratulations. Is a digital art pad needed in order to do game art? Depends on what you're doing. I would say, is it needed? No, it's never needed. If you're doing modeling or sculpting, specifically sculpting, I would say yes, it is, because the pressure sensitivity and just it's a whole nother level of control. Like I could sculpt this with a mouse, but it would take me a much longer time to do than what we've done here. needs a kind of a push though. No references for this sketch. I kind of just wanted to make something from scratch. Was getting a little fantasy, and now it's almost like feels like something you might see in a Star Trek episode. You're new to sculpting. Do I suggest Blender or ZBrush? For sculpting specifically, I would choose ZBrush. And I'm using ZBrush today. Best person that just asked that. Probably one of my favorite things that's been implemented into ZBrush is the Sculptors Pro mode, because you can just sketch. Before being able to just kind of pull stuff like this and just see what it would look like was really challenging, right? You would have to kind of go subdivision levels up incredibly high, just not easy. And now with this, you can just so easily push and pull and try something new and get some fun but fast results. Especially if you're somebody who's going to paint on this, like if you're an illustrator or you're a concept artist, like it's just far less technical now to have to not fight the program, but to understand all the little things that you should do to like optimize a sculpt or something, right? Cool to see that happening. Disabled. Okay. Try to get to a finished result relatively quickly, and maybe we'll jump into something else. So again, we're using ZBrush. While I kind of noodle on this, there was a question earlier about how I got started in art, and so I guess I'll kind of tell that story while we start to wrap this up. My start in art, I was not one of the people who, thought that they were going to be an artist. When they were younger, I did do a lot of drawing. I did do a lot of sculpting in high school, but that was mostly because they were the easy classes for me. Just drawing and sculpting was an easier class than as an elective than other classes were. So I often would take them just because I enjoyed them more. When I graduated high school, I didn't really think of art as a career at all, actually. I didn't know that there were options in art as a career. I didn't know about entertainment art, really. And so I ended up going into being an auto body mechanic, an auto body apprentice, taking apart cars and putting them back together when they came into the body shop. I did that for a while, and then I went to a business school thinking that I wanted to get into business in some way. It's not very successful for me. So I failed those classes. And then eventually I kind of got into a school. I'm from Colorado. I'm not from Los Angeles. I got into a school that was an art school, and it kind of got the spark in me, at least, that art could potentially be an avenue that I could take as professional. I did that. I graduated from that school and realized that I liked this, but I needed a little bit more training. And so I ended up applying to Gnomon. So it wasn't really a thing for me that was like, oh, this is totally what I want to do. This is exactly the field that I want. I had no idea about most of these positions. I knew that there was modelers after I had gone to college the first time. I knew nothing about what they really did, right? I knew nothing about any of those specifics. And so I ended up kind of not falling into it, but falling into it, being fortunate and finding something that I liked. But it was definitely Gnomon that going to Gnomon was a big part of me finding like what I wanted to do, or finding a little bit more of me, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. All right, we are probably at the point where this needs either another good push or we should stop. Meaning, I think I go like this. I think that we got a good push where we were from here to here. But I think it just needs a little more. Mike Nash is working on hard surface Dynamesh and ZBrush, but you wish to understand of how to do hard surface in ZBrush. You can do it using either just sculpting, which is kind of the way that I usually have done it, and I think that's the same way Mike Nash does it as well. But also, you can just use ZModeler, which is kind of a newish approach. And that also works really, really well. Change add some forms here. Kind of like the weird hairline it made there. Gives more of a focus to the overall focus shape of the face. I think sculpting and hard surface modeling are very different animals. I do, yes. Especially if you're doing it in another software package. Absolutely, they're completely different. If you're doing it in ZBrush using something like ZModeler, or just sculpting hard surface elements, it's actually not that different. It's more just about kind of having a little bit more patience, I think. Hard surface sculpting is not necessarily, I think, something that is necessarily fast, right? In ZBrush, you want to get all the little details, you want to get everything in, and it just is it is harder, I think, to do than people expect it to be. It's so much about defining planes. But it is challenging, but it's definitely doable. But I would say, you know, like that's for, say, if we jumped into Maya, like modeling this is a very different type of a skill than, you know, sculpting something like this. It's much more. This is honestly just much more like you would be sculpting it in clay. Different tools, obviously, but you know, sculpting it in clay is going to be different than working with wireframes, understanding topology and meshes and pinches and all that stuff that frustrates modelers is a different mindset. If you come into it with a traditional or strong sculpting ability or background, you'll find that it's actually a lot easier to learn that stuff. I don't like this nose at all. Do people tend to specialize? They do. They do tend to specialize, but I think that the artists that you see that really stick out are the ones that don't. You know, so somebody who can have really good range, right? Meaning they can do hard surface sculpting, hard surface modeling, that they can do something like an organic character, they can do an organic creature, they can do a costume, they can do a robot, they can do a car. Like the people that you really kind of look at and see that, like, oh, they stand out and they can do a little bit of everything. You know, maybe they have some design sense as well. They just kind of stick out, and I think that's one of the big things that makes them stick out is that they are able or available to do whatever the next project is, right? If you're working at a big company and you're working maybe at a post house, you don't always get to choose what your next project is. And so, if you're a modeler who's, wanting to do some work, and the first movie you work on is some creature movie, right? So you're making creatures and organic stuff, where maybe you're doing digital doubles of animals or people, right? And then the next project is like a Transformers movie, and you have to make Transformers. You all of a sudden are not really suited to work on a big project, and that's going to hurt you, or you're going to be forced to learn very quickly, which does happen. But it's just kind of the ones who stick out are the ones who can do everything. So having that range is, I think, is pretty important. It's something that I've tried to do in my career is bounce back and forth between projects or characters or things that are different. So often I'll do, like, if I'm working on personal work, I'll do something that's kind of what we did today, actually. It's kind of a nice palette cleanser. Is, we've been working on this character for a while, who I should actually load up in here. So we'll just do that real quick. Working on something like this. Right, which is a very different type of character than something like this. And so if you can jump back and forth between those kinds of things, it's going to help you quite a bit. Just kind of keep yourself loose. Don't get stuck in one thing. So it is helpful to do that for sure. Got a question. What do I think the scale mismatching that ZBrush makes with the export at the retopology steps afterwards? I believe if you go to export, and usually I just don't mess with any of this. It does sometimes, ZBrush has its own scale, and I think that's really what you're working with. If you want to fix that, or if you have a specific scale that you'd like to use, what you can do is you just start in the program you want at that scale and bring in a mesh to use. It can even just be a box, or it can be something simple. And you can basically say, like, all right, I want to use, let's say we're in here, right? Okay, I want to use a model that is, this is a foot. I'm going to export this at the center of the grid here into ZBrush, and then model around the cube, rather than modeling in ZBrush and bringing it in, where you're going to have kind of an unknown as far as what the size of the scale is going to be. And that can help you out quite a bit. Will I play Cyberpunk 2077? Do I play games nowadays ever? I do play games nowadays, yeah. I play a lot more tabletop games or virtual tabletop games, so like D&D and stuff like that. I do still play other games. I've recently been playing Hades on Switch. I've been playing... getting back into Hearthstone, which has been fun. I tried Crusader Kings 3, which is pretty enjoyable. Very different, obviously. I do every now and then jump even into Fortnite, just to kind of see how the world is evolving. It's kind of like a cool way. I like what Fortnite does, where it's almost just more of like an adventure game at this point, like an exploration, where you can just explore the map with friends, rather than feeling like it's a hardcore battle royale every single time. And I guess I don't know if I answered the question about Cyberpunk. I do want to play Cyberpunk. I kind of have it queued up as something I might try to play over the break, for sure. Interested in seeing how it plays. I think the world looks great. I think the art is obviously beautiful. So it's more of a game I want to try. It's a large commitment is really the challenge, or the fear of not being able to get to it or get through it. I know I said I was going to jump into this, and we might. I'm just kind of enjoying working on this. So if anybody has any comments or questions about hard surface stuff or any of the process of the model that's here on the left, I am happy to answer those. I'm kind of just liking working on this guy. I kind of want to make like a counterpart to him. Just putting a little bit of texture on this stuff so that it's kind of broken up. So am I going to export this out as a normal map and apply it to a lower poly model? I don't think so. I'm kind of just doing that. I was doing this as a warm-up sketch. So this is probably going to stay in a folder of sketches. So probably not. You know, I mean, maybe I could I still hate this nose. Trying to get a little more change in the surface. Maybe that'll make me like it more. And definitely, in case you guys weren't aware, I was not intentionally channeling this at the beginning of the stream, but realized that I was probably subconsciously using some of this artist's art. They have a very hard to pronounce Instagram name, but they're super talented, and you should definitely give them a follow. But I realized that probably about 10 minutes into sculpting this, I was like, I think I'm kind of channeling this character here. So especially if you take this off, you'll see some of that influence. Want it to be clear that I'm not saying this is solely mine or anything, but there's definitely a resemblance there. But sometimes it's nice to do those almost like a study. Like, what is it about this person's art that is appealing? What is it that I like about it? And then kind of working off of that. Something I've been enjoying recently is basically getting to this point on the sketch. And you'll see I did it here on the mouth, and I did a little bit up here, but removing symmetry earlier than I normally would. So like right now, even though this is pretty low poly, just kind of starting to sculpt maybe on the eyes and say, like, okay, I'm going to flesh this out just a little bit. And then kind of do the same thing on the other side, and not trying to mirror exactly what I'm doing, but just resolving the forms similarly and just seeing where it goes. And I think that it sometimes creates a nice naturalism, especially like in the middle here. Like this is perfectly symmetrical. It should be broken, and like this could be resolved differently. And what that often will do is it'll help you break up that perfect symmetry look, which is something that makes something feel very 3D right away. So just kind of obliterating some of that and sculpting on top of it can get you to a similar result, but often a better looking result. Even like this nose, like maybe coming in and just trying to sculpt it without symmetry on. I try to draw the same shapes, I'm not going to be able to perfectly make it. So it can give it kind of that traditional feel to it very quickly. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a rip-off, especially if I'm calling it out saying, this is what it looks like that. So, yeah. He has a very specific style, or they have a very specific style in the way that they work, which is pretty cool. I like how they have rhythms that go throughout, and they kind of did this thing early, so I did get there unintentionally, just liking what their work was. But yeah, cool. They do great work. This will come back, I hope. There we go. All right, so I think what we'll do, even though I know I started this saying, I feel like I've done this a bunch, but I was starting saying, well, jump back into this. We'll do this for a little bit, and then we'll jump into another sculpt. So what I was doing here was adding these little elements in here, these little stripes, these little elements here, and kind of coming here and doing a morph target. You can kind of see the difference. And eventually I'm going to export that back into Maya to be able to change that. But right now this is just more fun. So I'm going to stick with this. I like the white here. It's interesting, like the color of the hair is really changing it. I'm sure if we did that to the body, it would do it as well. I think I like this. Cool. Let's make another one. I'm going to save this. We'll put him over here. It gets kind of weird with ZBrush when you get to the edges. Look how flat it gets. It's very strange. Get to a. This looks all right. There we go. We're going to now load in another one of these. It's actually, I shouldn't have done that. It's going to erase it anyways. So we'll have to load it back in. So this is what I had started from. So I'm going to go back in here, render, turn on my wax preview, which is what I was using. We'll go back into one of these. I think I was using this one. And then we'll load up the previous one. here. Where do I want you? Maybe bottom right. Reference points, so we have that. And we'll go in here. And again, this is where we started. So let's make like either a counterpart or a friend or like a familiar. What could we do that would be a nice little piece? Familiar seems like it could be fun. Like, here, I'll just show you what I'm thinking, I guess. Let's say this is this thing. Then we have another one that's tiny, like a little, it doesn't have to be a person, but it could be like a thing that's kind of like a little creature maybe. Which means we probably don't need this at all. Could probably just use a sphere. So we'll use a tool. You can use a project and I'll give you a Dynamesh sphere. But we'll just load up the polysphere. Keep this over here as like a little reminder of what we're making this for. We'll turn on symmetry, and I'm going to just kind of basically do this. You could use Z-spheres if you like. I actually quite like Z-spheres. This is going to basically make a body. I'm going to turn this into a Dynamesh object. You see that's probably way too high. I'm going to crank this way, way down. That's a little lower. So I'm using this to make a very, very quick and simple base mesh, just using Dynamesh. We'll hopefully, relatively quickly. I probably even want to go lower than this. I'm going to try 16. Yeah, it's even better. So this is where I should have some sort of a reference, because I don't fully know how the anatomy of something that's like this would work. So what I'm going to do is pull up something like this. I don't think he needs to be very detailed. It's more just making sure that it makes kind of sense. Pose makes sense. The character maybe makes sense. Try to get some gesture in there. Try to kind of understand where and how the anatomy might work. Maybe choosing something with 6 legs was a little ambitious for time. You know, another easy way that we could do this is just pull open something like this to kind of give another alternative option. Show you, I might do that. This might actually just be more effective, so we might just do this. Flipping something from scratch might be better, question mark, in the long run. But it's definitely going to be harder to kind of dial in quickly. I kind of actually like some of what's going on here with the gestures that are already in this mesh. Gestures, but also a lot of the pre-built stuff. Similar from us using the head planes, right? It gives us a nice base mesh to start from. We don't have to keep everything that's here. We can completely, you know, remove all this. I can smooth it, or I can stretch it around. You know, maybe I can take it and invert this and make it a little larger. Oh yeah, kitbat and like base mesh libraries and stuff like that. That is a very, very, very common thing to be reused in the industry. I think it's something where you try to make it so that you're not using exactly what was there, right? But you do. There's a kind of a smarter versus harder thing that you want to kind of keep in mind, which is, is it make it sort of like a lemur here? Is it worth the time and effort to do that when you could just, like you guys saw, like for me to take this, it has an extra set of legs, but we can add an extra set of legs pretty easily. To spend all the time to get the base form of an animal when you could use something that has the base form of an animal there already. Which one is faster, which one is easier, and at the end of the day, which one gives you the result that you actually want. They both can, but there's no shame in creating or using an existing mesh, unless you just really want to show off. I can sculpt from a sphere, I can sculpt from something. I think given enough time, and I think it's good practice to maybe do that. I think given enough time, most people who are confident in their sculpting abilities should be able to sphere. I'm kind of focusing on this area right now. You can see that there's still a resemblance to the original. Some of the base forms are there, but it's not quite the same. Obviously, the proportions are different. So yes, I decided to not go with this and use a pre-made base mesh to help me get there a little bit faster. Those of you who turned away and didn't realize that I changed my process here, doesn't mean we can't get what we wanted. We're just going to approach it in a different way. I want to see if I can get some of this vibe. Also crossing. No problem. Yeah, I just quickly re-sculpted it all from scratch and retopologized it. What I'm doing is I'm basically saying this is kind of the original proportions I was thinking. Hit Shift S again to see that, and now I can use this as like, how do I get there? What this is great is it has all this stuff already built in, right? What I'm going to try, I've never attempted this, actually not while people are watching, is to get those other set of legs back. So let's say maybe we'll duplicate this. No more subdivision levels. I think what am I gonna miss if I do this? Neck in, get that shoulder in, sort of some kind of a look. It's a dachshund, basically. We've made a dachshund. Duplicate. I'm just gonna move the whole thing backwards. And I'm gonna take this. It should be a polygroup now so I can hide it. Just this whole section here. Then I'm going to take the top and I'm just going to push it apart a little bit. That one could probably be smaller. This one should probably be the bigger one. And then we're just going to merge it down. This has existing topology, so we're going to need to go to geometry, delete hidden. We're going to merge. And then while we have this, I can just go into attempt to do a Dynamesh. I'm going to smooth that out a little bit. So we're going to do a Dynamesh. Now that is all one mesh, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted. And the only downside is I don't get this mouth. I think that's okay. I'm even going to do 256. A little better. I'm going to take this whole thing, I'm going to duplicate it so we have a mirror of that. I'm going to go to Z Remesher. I'm just going to hit the button and see what happens. It usually doesn't take more than 5 seconds. And this is where we have a new mesh. It's decently retopologized with the form that we have. So comparing this to this is what we started with here. And now we have this. You can sculpt the mouth in. Oh, keep remesh by union. That's interesting. Yeah, but I think we got a good start now. So now I can probably take this. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to take this. I'm going to clone it so it's a separate thing. It's easy, a little easier to find this way. I'm going to find our person, and I'm going to end it to the forehead. Perfect. This is actually roughly about the size I was thinking. I'm going to do some subtle adjustments on this first before we go too much further, and then I'm going to end up just posing it on the character, and we'll go from there. Little muscles. Let's make some adjustments on this face. Yeah, I think ZBrush just released one, right? general, we might want to consider sizing this head up. That's close enough. All right, so let's take this and get our pose going. I'm going to take the neck. What I'm going to do is just a really easy way to pose so that you don't ruin the rest of your sculpt on the face, like the symmetry on the face or anything that you want to do. Go ahead and just kind of mask the bottom. We're going to just do it so we could do a really easy portrait of this character. Bring symmetry off. I'm just going to rotate the neck. So you can kind of get a little bit of a, if we're just showing this part, you're going to get a little bit of turn, a bit of turn depending on what we're interested in. I kind of like this. At that point, you also want to probably adjust some of your anatomy. But that way we have sort of a little bit of a pose here. Something to note is when you do this stuff, you start posing, you are making shapes that should flex and adjust, and just spinning them or just rotating them isn't going to really be enough to simulate that. So often I will spend a little bit of time, kind of tweaking that and redefining some of these forms, or, creating a little bit of a crunch. Well, this is going to flex more and this is going to stretch more a little bit. So maybe finding a way to make that more apparent in the sculpt, I think can help a little bit what you're trying to kind of show in the pose. It doesn't need to take long, 5-10 minutes. Get this one over here. Local symmetry on it, so no matter where I've moved it, it is able to be sculpted. So maybe let's go ahead and just try to pose this as quickly as we can. What would be a fun pose? Sticking up would be nice. Starting a good starting point for it is kind of what I'm looking for right now. Like, what is this character? What is the position that they're going to be in? So am I rotating? Are they looking at the camera? Are they looking at him? I kind of like him. Them looking at him is interesting. Yeah, I think it maybe the other way's better. So I'd probably want to just adjust the whole body first. Posing creatures is very different than posing a character because you're doing a full body. Posing in ZBrush is definitely doable, and I've seen some. There is a lot of really great work out there. It is hard, though. It is basically like taking a armature, right, and just tweaking it. You can bend like I'm doing now, and that can actually be very hard. What I'll often do is I'll use just a brush and accept that the form that was there initially, especially if you're doing a more dynamic pose like I'm hoping to get into, if you're doing something that's going to have a bit of a more dynamic look to it, I'll just probably secure this so it can't go anywhere. We'll just bend this thing into shape. And I'm also going to kind of base, since this is more of a conceptual thing, I'm going to base it around what I want the end result to be. So if I want this little bit to be here, hanging over here, at this point I'm basically going to not use symmetry, and I'm just going to be using move brush, the move elastic brush, and a couple things here to kind of create a pose. What is this jam? The playlist. Yeah, sure. It's another copyright-free playlist on Spotify. It is by Shay Ray 3 with the picture of Bart Simpson. The two heads were interesting, weren't they? Like, oh, that's an option. All right, I think we're getting to the point where this is probably close as far as like just being able to sculpt on this again. I might bring like just this leg like super far forward. So it could maybe be seen like in here. At the end of the day, I don't think you're even going to see it. So my idea of having it have extra legs is probably only super valid from the other side. Getting a different angle of what I'm showing now or considering showing. It should be further back, maybe. And then maybe this one should go up. At this point, I'm clearly just mushing this mesh, but it needs to change based on whatever the pose would be. So it's going to kind of have to be okay with this. And then I can adjust from there. So this is why I kind of like when I start posing something like this, I'm really just kind of trying to see what would be required. Like what is the story saying right now? Like what is, if this character's leg is kind of coming up and almost standing on the back, and then sculpting based around that. I'm not necessarily trying to make it just one thing. I think that I see this a lot where somebody's going to come in and try to sculpt a pose and they don't really think about necessarily like the overall image, but they also don't really think about being able to break the model. Like if you're doing a pose like this, especially for a sculptural thing, it's no different than 2D animation if you think about like squash and stretch, right? Squash and stretch is breaking the model. That's exactly what it does. And it seems counterintuitive when you're doing a 3D model or something like that, where it almost feels like you shouldn't be able to, because it's part of the, like, you made something that is perfect and has accurate form or whatever it is that you wanted it to have. But you do need to be able to kind of story and make it work for what you're doing. So don't be afraid to break it if you have to. If it feels like it's going to work better, break it. Kind of it almost being like this needle-nosed. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was a fun piece that I worked on a while ago, doing attempting to do comic renders, basically using ZBrush only and using some of the fancy rendering styles and stuff to do something different. Really enjoyed this project. It's a fun one. Posing is definitely its own beast. Absolutely. It is one where, you could spend hours and days and, posing and trying to make it exactly perfect. And this is not there, but it's getting there. I think parts of it are working, and I'm realistically just working from like this angle right here. So if something is working, good. I'm trying to keep that. If something's not working, I'll adjust that later or see what I can do with it. Posing is a challenge. I know it's interesting. I've had this conversation before. Some people, it has taken me a long time to even feel comfortable with posing, being able to pose models, being able to, kind of do it on the fly, not having to do reference every single time and just trying to think of how the body might work, which I'm kind of getting here. I definitely think there's some issues, a lot of issues, but there's some people who are not good at posing. And so I always recommend, for portfolios, if you are not good at posing, don't pose your models and just have them in T-pose, because a bad pose, especially for a portfolio, especially if you're trying to do like a modeling portfolio or something like that, a bad pose can really make your work look far worse than it not than it is, but it can make it look worse than like it was intended to. Suit a dragon, I guess. is going to be a relatively small element in this sculpt, so I kind of want it to not to feel unfinished, but I want it to feel a little looser than the rest of it. I'm still not entirely sure what the shape of the head is going to be, though, so we're going to spend a minute on that. I could use transform, activate symmetry, use posable symmetry. This will actually, even though the character is posed, like you'll see, I can sculpt on both the hands or both these legs at the same time. You can use this a decent level of success. Once you start posing stuff, sometimes the level of like movement that you've done on your mesh can be pretty significant, so you need to be careful that it doesn't like just overall sculpt something really weird. But for what I'm doing right now, it can actually be pretty effective. It will only do it on singular levels of your like if I go down a subdivision level right now, it won't work. But I can still switch between all this kind of stuff. I like that these little frills kind of match his beard. Trying to find like an element that like ties them together a little bit. How long have I been in the industry? I have been in the industry for 10 years. I graduated from Gnomon at the very end of 2009. Not sure about this head yet. Sculpting in pose is far more difficult than sculpting out of pose. Something that sounds like it should be a no-brainer, but it's always a challenge when you come back to it and you're like, oh, this looks really odd. I'm also kind of still exploring. Like, I don't really know what this head should look like. There's certain design elements that maybe I want to try to keep. Is it like gills? Is there flashes of things? Is there spikes? You know, is there... So aside from just like generally a shape, it's also like what should it look? What should they look like in general? side is disaster. So we're going to pretend that this side, only this side exists right now. That whole symmetry thing not play out as well on this side. What do I think about working in a studio versus working freelance? Both are great. Studios you're going to likely be able to work on projects for longer or bigger projects sometimes. Building up to freelance is a challenge. You have to build up clients, which means you have to have connections and know people and kind of prove yourself. So freelance is great, but getting there can be, I think, more difficult than some people expect it to be. Both are really good options. If you're somebody who likes to work on multiple projects or you get bored, with singular projects, freelance is probably the way to go. Mammal. Eggs. Sure. Hello, side effects. Welcome. I figure out the eyeball. For now, we'll just leave it like this. I think the general shape is working now. How many various species did I work on Cloud Imperium? Probably, I don't know, a bunch. We explored all different kinds of things. Ones that were shown, probably 5. Many more than that, for sure. Classes do I teach? I teach an introduction to digital production, or overview of digital production, excuse me, and that's basically talk about careers, we talk about jobs, we talk about resources, we talk about history of film and game, and just kind of generally cover a lot of that stuff for incoming students into Gnomon. I used to teach our character modeling and sculpting class. And I used to teach hard surface modeling class. Right now I just teach the one class. I'm just trying to get that sense of believability in here. I actually enjoy teaching overview. It's a fun class, and especially for me, I get to meet all of our incoming first-term students. So I get to meet them, and I also try to make myself available to them as a mentor, which I think is important. So if they have any questions, comments, if anything along the way at their journey throughout the programs, I know them, and then also when they graduate, I can get to know them a little bit, help them find jobs, or maybe if I know people, it's kind of a good way for me to get to know them, which I like about it. So I actually quite enjoy the intro class. I think that creature-wise, I could probably get away with what we've got here as far as the overall stance and posture, and I think that generally it's at a pretty decent spot. I think there's some adjustments that could still be made. All right, so let's see. Especially from the side, it's kind of weak. I think maybe bringing that down will help. Yeah. Just changing some of the posture up feels good. I'm going to play around quickly with just the pose of the head. I've already done this, but now that it's in more of a final state, does it kind of go this way? Even though that side of the head was a disaster. I think I like that more. And then we can always play around with this direction. Be like, is it looking up? Is it looking down? Is it, what is it kind of doing? So I think something that's almost kind of like this feels a little bit better to me. Something went wrong there. Something went wrong. I think I turned the head too far or something. Oh, I think when I adjusted that little flare, it kind of makes it confusing. That's not too bad. Makes this very evident that I didn't really think this part through. You fix one thing, other things become problems, and that's just part of the process. Realizing that like the neck was really straight from the bottom, so going over here and trying to give it a little bit of a curve, which I think will help quite a bit. So sculpting something without symmetry on, without any of that on, is going to be always have these kind of challenges where you're going to be in some ways making it up a lot of the times as you go. That's probably okay. Bad considering, you know, if I'm going to save this real quick, but considering that this little character started out as this. And I bring it in and positioning it on the fly. You can see kind of the pose that's being implemented here, and then exploring the design and kind of getting to where we are now. I think we're at a cool spot with it. And again, we actually started with this as our base mesh. Nice. Spent a lot more time on it, and especially other angles. It's definitely falling apart, as you can kind of see here. Parts of the sculpture not very successful. The Anubis. Not as an intentional, but I do like that reference point, so that's something I could, play around with more. Trying to get some sense of form here. I want to explore with more facial hair. Around with it real quick. I think the thing to me about posing is, even though you want to work on it from one angle, the things that you learn about the pose in other angles affect the result so much that you're kind of always having to go around, like you're always having to orbit around and trying to make sure that it looks good from multiple angles, even though you might only see it from one angle. Like this if I rotate here, I see like the neck feels really odd. So if I come in here and I say, okay, like, how do I fix that? It's like maybe this needs to come back. Maybe this needs to go. Little side frill could come back. And it might create some problems for the specific angle that I'm working in, but at the same time, it also might enhance it quite a bit and make it feel more realistic, because it will be more realistic. So it's kind of always about just like exploring, different ways of working and making sure that everything looks good all the way around. And eventually, it will pay off, even though it can take a little longer. Don't waste times on things you don't see. Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, let's say you want to turn it around or you want to do something with it, like, then now you're kind of stuck. I think I like a little bit of this stuff in here, like this higher level stuff. TLC. Yeah. This is the, oh yeah, maybe this now. So I like how the Sculptors Pro mode can like decimate stuff, because often I'll find like if it's lumpy, like this is kind of lumpy, I could just decimate it basically by slightly moving it. It'll try to maintain the shape, but it'll give me like a nice cleaner almost result sometimes. Kind of been enjoying the look of. I think it's kind of cool. And this thing's color is way off though too. He's like Abraham Lincoln, yes. Kind of like the yellow version. I think this one is like the good starting point. And now we could do a little bit of texturing. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on texturing because we don't have the time to texture today. But maybe we'll just get a really quick color on this. So we're going to switch our brush to color only. We're going to change our stroke to spray. We're going to change our spray color to 0 or very low. We're going to change our alpha to a thing that looks like this. This is essentially going to make a version of like an airbrush. Okay, so I can come in here. I've already got my color here. I'm just going to move around the wheel, not changing the value or the saturation. So when I spray, I'll kind of get a different tone, but within the same value range. So I'm going to give it like a little bit of green on top, because I think those greens kind of work, but not specifically with him. So maybe we'll get like a little darker version instead. Look at some of those opposites. Opposite of yellow, purple. Ooh. Let's see what some of these spots could look like. Maybe not doing this one, but doing like a scratchy texture. I go across the body quickly and undo real quick. Select that as my background color so that if I wanted to, I'm going to come in as well with that yellow again and say like, all right, maybe this is bulk of this. But some of these areas might have these cool areas that we'll get to. It doesn't have to specifically be that color, but it's kind of a nice starting point for what we need to transition to or what we should transition to. And then we'll take this and let's get like a brighter color of that. Just to lay in some color. This is again not necessarily what it's going to look like, but kind of getting the idea that there is going to be some color variation in this character. This is kind of what we're doing with the face as well, right? We could spend a bunch of time doing that, but it's not what we need to necessarily start on. I still have no idea what the face is going to look like, so I could also come in here and just use, like, is there a stripe, like a crest? Go all the way down. Is it normal to have 20 plus hours into these sculpts for presentations? No, depends on what you're doing. Obviously, I mean, this is 3 hours of work. So if we were using this as a concept, I might spend a little more time, maybe, on like some of this stuff, but I would also be spending more time on the actual rendering part of it as well, like what the presentation is, and doing that. So maybe that's what we'll work on next week. I know it's entirely pivoted from what the original point of this stream was today, but I think it's kind of fun to get out of our normal elements, do something different. Close enough on that one. And then we got a couple minutes left, so we'll try to do something here as well. No, we'll keep it what it was. So this one seems like the opposable symmetry is off because of something. So that's not going to work. And the symmetry itself seems off. There we go. That's in like the different mode. That's very odd. I've really seen that, so I'm not going to be using that today. But we'll get some warm tones in here. Well, first let's just do a really simple cavity pass. This is a fast way to texture. So I do like a masking, do a mask by cavity. Mask by cavity, you'll get all this kind of stuff. Typically I just invert it, or you can have it like this, and then you can fill with just a color. That'll give you some options here. I'm going to select this color, and then I'm going to choose like a darker tone, and then I'm going to try to just kind of model in M-O-T-T-L-E, not M-O-D-E-L, model in some of these darker cavities. You see if I go crazy, it'll kind of cover the whole thing. It's not really what we want of that. So I'm going to just kind of get some of these areas to use a little bit of darker tones. And then I'm going to get some warmer tones. We'll kind of get some of this in here. I like making this pretty fleshy. That idea feels good to me right now. Not that they're bloodshot eyes, but that's like the eye color. I'm doing very bright colors here, because when I cover this up with the normal skin tone that I had started with, it's going to kind of stick through a little bit more. This is kind of a very traditional style of painting. And then coming through with this, and I'll probably use this scratchy one. I like this quite a bit. There's not a ton of vertices here, so the color is not going to be as intricate as I would want it, but I can come in that, and I'll make a secondary option of this, which is just kind of slightly darker and more saturated, so that when I do paint on it, when this returns, you see it's kind of got a darker tone there versus a lighter tone. Darker, lighter. Let's get the darker one in first, and a lighter one in. I'm trying to push it back where you just don't really notice it. You want to see it, but you don't want to see it. And I would just continue to do this over and over and just kind of layer it up until something really starts to stick. Eyes, of course, we'll choose they're all very saturated colors. All right, everybody. Well, that is going to be the end of the stream today. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with me. I'm excited to kind of maybe try to finish this off in another stream, next stream maybe. We can always do some adjustments later on what this is looking like, but I think I'm happy with how it's going. So thank you so much for joining Art Jam today. We'll be doing this again next week. We will probably be taking a 2-week break around Christmas, like we did around Thanksgiving, just to have some time off. But thank you very much for joining in today, and I look forward to doing this next week with y'all. Have a good day, and I